Hey everyone, happy Monday to you. Hope this finds you well. It's been a great weekend. We had 3 baptisms yesterday. We saw Josh baptized right after church. A little bit after that in the afternoon, we had Ryan DeFalco baptized. And then in the evening, around 7 o'clock, Laura was baptized, who is Nikki's cousin. And just such an encouraging weekend. I mean, wow, spending time with the church, getting the scriptures, fellowshipping, hearing from the teens about Hope Camp, seeing the baptisms. So good to see what God is up to in the Pioneer Valley and to see God moving in that way, and grateful to share that with you. I wanted to just touch base on a few things from our talk yesterday in Mark 13. We discussed Mark 13 as a prophecy for the end of the temple age and the destruction of the temple and the war of in Jerusalem, between Rome and Jerusalem, and that's what I shared it was, and not the end time predictions that some people have made it out to be. Many of us have been around groups that have tried to predict the future, or we've been a part of cultural moments that have been about predicting the future. Some of us lived through Y2K, and we remember, oh no, the end of the world of Y2K, and then that didn't happen, and then a few years later it was the end of the Mayan calendar, and that's going to mean the end of the world, and then that didn't happen. We're still here, and as long as people have been around, they've been trying to predict when the world will end, when things will end, and as long as Christianity has been around, there's always been, confused and misguided leaders who have tried to predict the end of the world as well, and none of it's ever come to fruition. And they've used a lot of passages like this to say, oh, well, there's wars and there's famines and there's plagues and there's all these troubles, and that's telling us that this is we're getting close to the end. But there have always been wars, and there's always been famines, and there's always been plagues, and there's always been floods. There's always been these things. It doesn't mean that anything is any different than it always has been. And so we're foolish to try to predict the end of the world based on the scriptures in any kind of a sense. And that's not what Mark is doing. Mark 13, just like Matthew 24, just like Luke 21, they're all referring to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the end of that age. And so it's important that we go back and we just look at that. I thought it was really interesting. If you read a little bit farther in Mark 13, this is a passage, again, that gets talked about in the sense of the end of the world. And it may be true, but it's not what Jesus is talking about here in this passage. In Mark 13, verse 32, he says, "But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come." It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each one with their assigned tasks, and tells the other at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. And so we have read that passage many times. People have read that passage, and we tend to think of, oh, well, the end of the world. Jesus is talking about the end of the world. But actually, again, if you're reading in context, you're reading what Mark is doing, he's talking about the end of this temple age, the destruction of the temple, and what's coming in this persecution for the Christians. Just a little bit earlier in verse 18, he says, pray, telling these disciples who he's telling this is going to happen, pray it doesn't happen in winter. Meaning, I don't know if it's going to happen in winter or spring or when. Just pray it doesn't happen in winter. Maybe God will answer that prayer. So Jesus clearly doesn't know the exact time or when this is going to happen, when this war is going to break out, when this temple is going to get destroyed. But he knows it's coming. He's a prophet to Jerusalem. He knows this age is coming to an end. The new age of the kingdom of Jesus has come. And then again, in verse 30, he says, look, this generation is going to see this happen. They're not going to pass away before these things happen. So this is all one thought. This isn't separate thoughts. It's not Jesus talking about the end of Jerusalem and then jumping to the end of the world. None of that. He is talking about all one prediction, one prophecy about what's going to happen in Jerusalem in the generation of these disciples and the end of the age of the temple. And so it's so important to just keep that in mind. The Bible does say that Jesus will return, though, that there will be a final trumpet, that God will bring a second Jerusalem and fill the earth and remove death once and for all. And in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul talks about that moment. He says in verse 51, "Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will all be changed." And so he says, look, when that moment happens, you're not going to have time to run down and get a cloak. You're not going to survive and still need to preach to the nations, which is all what Mark and Matthew and Luke are saying in those predictions of the temple destruction. He says, no, when the final trumpet sounds, when Jesus returns, it's going to happen in a second. Those who are already asleep in the Lord, who are in paradise, who have gone before us, they will resurrect. And those of us who are alive when Jesus returns, we will all be changed in an instant. We will all have resurrected bodies as Jesus has, who is the firstborn among many, right? He's the first to resurrect, and someday we will all share that resurrected body. And so that's what's going to happen at the end. If you want to study out more of this, you can look at a couple of links I'll put in the this description of this video. Gordon Ferguson has a great blog post on this. It's short. You could read it in 15 minutes or 10 minutes. It's a great study of this passage. And actually, he's not studying Mark 13. I think he's studying more the Matthew 24 passage. But it's a great study, again, of what Jesus is talking about in the temple destruction, not the end of the world. And then I'll include also a link on from the Bible Project about the temple, just really helpful to kind of, again, understand the context of what that would all feel like if the temple was destroyed, the world-ending event for the Jews. And then lastly, I'll include a link for John Oakes' book. It's a really short book. It's called Daniel, a Prophet to the Nations. If you're interested in studying out more, the abomination that causes desolation, this is a fantastic book. John, he breaks down the book into two sections. One are all the practical discipleship lessons from the book of Daniel about standing firm in your faith, not giving into idol worship, all these kind of prayer, all these kind of great practical lessons. And then the second part of the book, I can't remember if it's the first or the second, but the other part of the book, he just breaks down the prophecies of Daniel, and he walks through history, through Cyrus the Great, through the Babylonian exile, through the Roman Empire. He walks through history, how these prophecies in Daniel 500 years before have been fulfilled by the time of AD 70. And so just a really powerful book, again, to see God's work in prophecy in this way, in Daniel and in Jesus, the last prophet to Jerusalem. Just a powerful way to see God telling ahead of time, preparing his people for suffering, for persecution, for trials, but also for the refinement of their faith that will come from that will help them value more of the kingdom and their faith in him. And just a powerful study, I think. So I'll include those links. Hope that helps. Look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. We're back into our midweek series. We're going to begin discussing, we'll finish up our conversation on studying the Bible and the discovery studies, and then we'll shift gears this month to start talking about small groups. If you're thinking about leading a small group, if you're envisioning leading a small group, this is a great time to begin to kind of put the descriptors into that, where, when, who, what is going to be that small group, and we'll have times even in the midweeks to just share who's thinking about it and what do you want to do and that kind of stuff, and people can stand up and share briefly about their small group that they're imagining here in the fall. And then we'll see you on Sunday. We're wrapping up our Mark series in the next 2 weeks, so we're going to have a little bit of a different approach this Sunday. We're going to have a few more people share as we walk through the cross, and then Josh is going to close us out the following week as we land in the resurrection, the good news of the resurrection, and we'll wrap up the Gospel of Mark together. It's been a great journey. See you this week. Love you guys.